to Alexi for following instructions.
Yes, round of applause, Alexi.
All right, I think we go ahead and get started while people take a seat. Welcome everybody today. My name is Brian Chow. I'm the Program Director for BioStrategy Partners. Happy to see very familiar faces today. We have a great panel today. We are BioStrategy Partners. Heather is going to talk a little bit more about what we do, but the ultimate goal is to try and move technology from the academia into the marketplace and provide an opportunity for people to learn and network about technology transfer. So I would like to thank our sponsors today, MDM Associates, Solid Viewing, Center for Diagnostic Discovery, and Meniscus Limited. Thank you so much for supporting us for this panel. I would also like to give a shout out to Larissa from BioLabs, who has been amazing to help coordinate the event. That should be it. All right, I will leave it to Heather.
Yes. Particular thanks to BioLabs in general, Melina Blees, and Ponderosa Lemons, Jason Rose for the AV. We are incredibly thankful for the space and for the amenities, and just to be able to reach everybody today. So BioStrategy Partners is a 501c3 nonprofit consortium of Wistar Institute, Temple Fox Chase, Penn State Hershey, Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine, Jefferson, and Duke NUS. We work to try to de-aggravate the process of working with the technology transfer offices in our different regional hospitals and academic centers and help people spin out technologies to get them to the people who need them. So we imagine ourselves as the midwives, if you will, who will catch the babies and get them out into the world, get them to college. So we try to translate the technologies to get them into the world. So we try to get them funding and get them teams around them, get them to value inflection points, which Delphoni will talk about that later, and get them through kindergarten, teach the children to walk. So our goal is to help people conceptualize how to take something that's at a bench or in the clinic that's a great idea all the way through to market, to make it a real technology that can actually help people. And everybody that's on the board of BioStrategy Partners is an expert in the field and has been doing this for many, many years. So we have a great panel today. I'm going to briefly introduce myself, and I'm going to let the rest of the panel introduce themselves, because it's an interesting thing where you work with somebody for a decade and then realize you don't know their actual title, isn't it? So, but I do know mine. So my name is Heather Rose, and I'm the Vice President of Technology Licensing and Startups for Jefferson Health and Jefferson University. Briefly, my background is that I have a PhD from the University of Pennsylvania's Medical School in genetics and gene therapy. I worked on delivering safer therapeutic gene doses, in particular worked on a SCID trial for children born without adaptive immune systems. Then I moved into intellectual property law. I got a JD from Drexel Law, and while I was in law school, I was fortunate to do a co-op at GSK's corporate IP department. Then they kept me on. After that, I've worked exclusively with academic centers, first at Drexel and then with Jefferson, helping them translate their technologies. Jefferson is a large health system. We have now 15 hospitals, we have 7,000 clinicians, and we're a $15 billion a year annual revenue health system. And we have 20 spinouts that have raised over $500 million a year, $500 million in the past 5 years. So one of them is in this building, which is Imvax, which actually just closed at 29 million raise, and is, yay. Actually just yesterday, and that puts them at 230-ish, so 230 million. So phase 2B clinical trials.
Steve Nappy, Associate Vice President for Technology Commercialization and Business Development at Temple University. I've been working at that interface of moving innovation out of the institution for development and commercialization for close to 25 years. I'm going to have to look at my LinkedIn profile actually to see what that actually is. But at Temple, really that encompasses four key components. So commercialization, so we have a team that works at that interface to move and protect intellectual property and commercialize it. We have a small contracts group that deals with the various interfaces with industry, whether it's sponsored research, material transfers moving in and out, confidentiality agreements. We also have a student and alumni innovation group with representatives here, so we do touch that audience as well. And we just recently wrapped all of that under what is called the Innovation Nest, which is a 9,000 square foot facility on campus that houses all of these programs.
Awesome. That's fantastic. Hi, I'm Delphine Banerjee. Please let me know if you can't hear me. Delphine Banerjee. I have over 30 years of experience in pharma. I started out my early career in actually academic laboratories before making the jump to pharma. Spent most of my corporate career at Merck, where I did a lot of things from the lab all the way through marketing. Left Merck many years ago, formed a company that's called 360 Pharma Solutions. That company is now over 14 years old. 360 Pharma Solutions helps pharmaceutical, biotechnology, and medical device companies develop their drugs and assets. Then I lost my mind about 2 years ago and spun out a startup, a biotech company. It's called Immunovics, and we are making better antigens for vaccines mostly. It's a great time for vaccines, right? For being in the vaccine business. So we make antigens for vaccines and for diagnostics as well. So I formed Immunovics Biotech about a couple of years ago, and we just got funded. So thank you.
My name is Justin Crotty. I'm a patent attorney and partner at Saul Ewing. My PhD is in chemistry, though I've always been as much of a life sciences person as I have been a chemistry person. After I finished my PhD, I went to George Washington University for my JD. And my practice is a mixture of patent prosecution and licensing. So we draft and file patent applications, argue with the patent office to try to get them issued, advise people about their intellectual property and try to help them understand it. And I also do a great deal of licensing. So we'll negotiate with potential partners, either in or out licensing. And crucially and germane to this event, defend and conduct diligence for those deals.
Excellent, thank you so much. And yeah, Justin actually does a lot of work for us. So I talked to Justin a ton, and Steve's on the board of BioSP, so I talked to him a ton, and Delphine is currently participating with BioSP in a large grant that we're submitting together.
And on the board
INEST. Yep. So we all work together a lot. So this panel came together very organically, and I think we're going to have a great discussion today. And we're going to start super duper broad. And I'm just going to ask you, Steve, what does TTO do?
Sure. So I think that question, the answer to that has evolved over time. So right now, the TTO is really along the ride for the entire innovation journey. So not to take up the whole time, but the key points being that initial intake of discovery is really a key action point for our office. But we also start earlier than that. So we put education out there. We're working with faculty members that are working on grants that have funded research to help them identify what may be a commercialization opportunity. So really before disclosure of new intellectual property hits, we are really out there in the community seeing if we can guide them to that point. So we have office hours in various schools and colleges to really be present with the researchers themselves. But quickly then from there, it's protecting the intellectual property, it's developing a commercialization strategy. That may be with an existing company, that may be the formation of a new company. If forming a new company, it's us working them through the process of acquiring a license from the institution, helping the company fundraise, down to when they're going through due diligence, we're by their side in terms of questions that they may have through that process. So really from our perspective, we are there from the first concept that they may have at that research stage all the way to market in terms of getting that concept to a product down the line. And then income that comes back from that, for example, we then do share institutionally internally, and we make sure that the inventors also get their share, which for Temple is about 40% of whatever we get. So.
Justin, can you comment on how you plug in then to that timeline?
Absolutely. So as patent attorneys, we have, in this space, we have sort of a dual lifestyle, whether we're representing the university or whether we're representing the company. When we're representing the university, the first time we'll hear about the technology is usually when the TTO will send us a disclosure and ask us to work with the inventors to prepare and file a patent application. So this is, it's a moment when there's much more certainty about what the technology is actually going to look like and what this company is ultimately going to be able to protect when it's formed. And we'll usually continue to work with them throughout the process, but at some point, the company is likely to need their own counsel because they'll have their own questions and may even be filing their own IP. And if that's going to be our role in the process, at some point the company will make that decision and retain us or someone like us to take on that role.
Delphine, I'd love to hear also how your services can become part of this journey. Yeah.
Absolutely, they certainly do. We have, I didn't mention this in my introduction, but 360 Pharma Solutions has 3 cadres of clients. We have our startup clients, which is what we're here to talk about, mid-sized companies as well as big pharma we also serve. So in the startup space, I like to say, do everything. We help our clients create IND enabling study plans, for instance, or even before that, let me just take a half step back because we begin with the end in mind. So you have a molecule or a compound, or a company does, and what they're thinking about a lot of times is, well, patents, of course, but also of just getting that next experiment, doing getting to the next milestone vis-a-vis the science. What we help them see, and not every client needs this, but we help them see that, well, your science can be brilliant, but you have to figure out who's going to pay for it as well. So you need a reimbursement strategy, a regulatory strategy, which a lot of clients already are aware of, but also it's really important, and sometimes some companies, depending on their capabilities, may not go backwards as far as they need to go to a target patient or a target product profile. It's really important to put those things together. So those are the types of things that we help clients see, and not just see, but also see the value of.
And because we have everybody together, this is one of the things that came up in our planning session, talking about how TTOs work with counsel on patent strategy. And so maybe that's something that Justin and Steve could just briefly touch on.
Sure. You want to go first? Yeah.
Why don't you start as the...
So for us, what we'll initially do is a screen to see if there's enough legs to the invention from a patent, from a commercial perspective. So our initial interaction with outside counsel may be an initial opinion in terms of, what do you think? Does this have the potential to actually make it through the patent office in terms of its novelty, it's non-obvious, and all the requirements? And then our office will go ahead and assess that opinion and assess what that commercial outlook is and make the determination in terms of whether or not to proceed with a patent filing. So really our office in that process then kicks off the process, and I'll hand it to Justin in terms of what you do from there.
And I'm going to add to that, though, and you may well have gotten to this.
Yep.
The other question is, do we need a patent? Is it worth it? So we reach out to somebody like Delphine or go into our Rolodex, and try to share something that would not, disclose anything confidential, and just find out if there's a mark, or maybe see if we have, confidentiality in place sufficient to just see if there's a sufficient market to warrant going through this process, because as Justin, I'm sure, will share, it can get quite expensive.
It's a good point. In terms of percentage, though, I think that's important if you're working this through a process. We probably end up filing on anywhere from 30 to 40% of what comes into the institution in terms of new inventions.
I'd like to comment on that too when he's done.
Yeah.
Oh, would you like to do it now or no? So as Steve says, we'll often help set expectations for what we might ultimately be able to cover. I mean, it's a complex determination, and we're never going to be absolutely certain about what will happen at the patent office, but we can, for example, put the brakes on if this is just not the right moment to patent. Perhaps it's too early. Perhaps that there'll be a statutory or other legal issue such as 101 or 112 that will really make this not an ideal situation to patent, and we should think about a trade secret or other ways to protect this. And it may even simply be a matter of, well, it's time to file a provisional application and see where we are in a year, because we can, with a lot of thought into it, we can kind of control when costs will accrue. There's nothing we can do about public disclosures and other things that may force our hand, but a close relationship with the TTO and working together to put in place a strategy to get this project off the ground in an IP sense can really pay dividends for the company throughout the whole early part of its life cycle. Once the provisional application is filed and you decide that you really want to go ahead, the next thing that happens is whether you're going to pursue rights only in the US or around the world as well through the Patent Cooperation Treaty. And based on the budget and what the plans are for the company, we can help develop a strategy that fits that budget and their business plans.
Daphne, do you want to jump in with how you like to be plugged into this process and can be used here?
Actually, it's very organic because our company offers subject matter experts to that have a lot of experience in the pharmaceutical arena, developing drugs, most of them have, and so are able to do some diligence around is this a viable target, is it a viable molecule, that kind of thing. So it's important to do that early.
Yeah.
One quick comment, Heather, just because I think that international filing component in terms of those that are spinning out companies or working with companies, just to be aware that this is a difficult point from a financial perspective for the institution, and you also shouldn't expect that the institution just has the budget to convert worldwide and cover the world in terms of its patents. So this is a really important consideration to map out early, know when that deadline's coming, and have a strategy with the university in terms of how you're going to cover the costs and what markets you might want to target in a more slimmed down approach.
That's a great point. All right, I'm good. And I'll add here, I have some team members here, and I think they'll all nod along. One thing I like to say frequently is, when somebody approaches us and they're not ready for a patent yet, I'd like to say, let's leave them in a better place than we found them. If it's not time for a patent yet, let's at least give them a concept of when they might be patentable, right? So biomarkers aren't patentable anymore. You can't patent a target. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't give them a concept around a drug that could hit their target and a partner that they could work with and a way to fund that. That gives them a package and a concept around a path towards a patent and something that's inarguably patentable. And also, please don't publish this before you come back to me. Some thoughts around coming back to me, something with some value. So that's one of the things I do like to leave them with. And now, Daphne, we're going to get a little deeper into what you do, because I want you to talk about, once you get that patent, then what, right? So we have these expensive timelines coming up, and we need to start thinking about value inflection points. So I would love for you to talk about, first of all, what is a value inflection point? I think some people may not even know what a value inflection point is. And then also, how do you plan for them, or how would you advise people planning for value inflection points?
So, in the context of the slide that you see here, the first value inflection point in our business, besides getting the patents and that kind of thing, from a scientific point of view, would be the IND. And so, basically, just everyone here is familiar with drug development. Please raise your hand if you are not. If you are not. Okay, so most people know, so we don't have to go through it. But essentially getting to that IND, is the first inflection point. And then, of course, your clinical trials, gathering the data to get to the IND is a big deal. And you really need a plan, and I think we've all said this, you need to plan for patents, you need to plan for your scientific development as well. And after your IND, obviously, we're looking at phase 1 clinical trials and phase 2 clinical trials and onward. I guess the major, someone asked me the other day after I did a talk, maybe a couple weeks ago, someone came up to me afterward and said, well, when do investors really want to, or when do pharmaceutical companies really, what is that sweet spot that they really want to buy a company or, license in their technology? And I said, which I think is true, and I'd love to hear others' opinions, but it really depends. Yeah. It depends. And so the inflection point can be different for others, but that first inflection point is going to be your IND.
I completely agree with you. It depends on so many factors. It depends on the industry that you're approaching. It depends on the market at that given point. It depends on the technology that you're developing. It depends on so many things. It's like looking at the night sky and saying, how far away is that star?
That's right. This was an angel investor who asked me this, and but it really is dependent. But he wanted sort of an answer, and to your point, Heather, there is no one answer.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And Steve, you're also on this timeline with people, and I think a question we get quite frequently is, how much is this going to cost?
Yeah.
That's a fun one.
A lot. So, but again, this is where.
And that's another. It depends too.
It depends. So.
But a lot is also the correct answer.
So that. In terms of your financing strategy, so I'll back it up in terms of the value inflection, but just comment on the value chain here. So the cost, in part, if you think about it in terms of the value chain for a technology, actually starts before this. So it is important to recognize that the universities have taken on and done R&D, mostly R, before this even starts. So it's important to also capture that moment, not that you could put it on the company books in any way, but there's hundreds of thousands, if easily millions of dollars of research that has already gone into the development of a technology. Then we bolt on to the typical value inflection point here. And a lot of our activity does sit in the basic R&D section here. You're looking at filing that initial intellectual property. We are normally licensing, so the transactional inflection point is normally connected in that basic research box. We are, in many cases, working with our startup companies with some of their initial funding to do some of the animal experiments, publishing, making sure that we're putting that communication out there. Again, bringing attention and value to the company. The company, when moving into that IND inflection point, that's when it starts to really grow its own independent legs. So you'll see the relationship start to shift a little bit with the university at that point. The company's starting to become more standalone. The company's starting to, add to its management, also add to its expertise around the table, including attorneys and so on. And so the university's typical contribution to the inflection points behind me at, say, an IND stage start to reduce, right? So we're now turning it over to the company to put that package together. We may be engaged during that process in terms of investor due diligence. We may be, in certain cases, a site for clinical trials post-IND. So that's an interesting connection with the university, but with the caveat that we have an interest. We have an interest as the IP owner. Sometimes we have an interest in the company. Our inventors may have an interest in the company that's running a clinical trial through this process. So that's only subject to the university being able to manage a conflict by being a site for a clinical trial. So that's really how we would layer on our contributions to the chart.
Well, you brought up a great point. I think something that our office does that a lot of people don't think about is, we're getting to like the saltine cracker portion of what we do, but it's help people manage conflicts of interest, think through conflicts of interest that they might overlook or not be aware of, and navigate the different offices. The other one I had on my list and I kind of forgot about was government by dole compliance, which is also something Justin might flag as well. It's on your list. Is there any funding for this? Is there any government funding? There's certain requirements about things that go into patents there, and then on our end there's a tremendous amount of things we need to do, to the point that we either have usually somebody in the office who's, a part-time employee, or we outsource the compliance. So, we don't, maybe if you want to expand on this, but there's stuff that we do that, people don't know we do because we just manage it, but it's dry, but it's essential.
Yeah, so the institution is working in the background with
compliance, yeah.
with that compliance, and then it's a great point, because look into your license. Right? Some of that will translate into your license.
Yes, that is correct, yeah.
The government wants to make sure that the manufacturing is being done substantially in the United States. Understand what that means. So where most of the intellectual property you're going to get probably has federal ties to it, and likely has that BIDOL component. So really understand what that means in terms of your commercialization strategy.
That's a great segue into our licensing terms and a discussion, actually. So why don't we now, Justin and Steve, transition over into talking about how to discuss a license with your TTO office.
You want me to start, or?
Why don't you start?
Okay. So, we've evolved this process over time, because we see where the friction gets created. We see areas for our improvement on the institution, on the university side. What we've really landed on is, and again, some of this being as a result of issues that we've experienced with licenses, is before you get into doc transfers, turns, negotiations, get together, sit down, and spend a lot of time actually understanding what you're going to do together. I think you can be very quick to a document without really understanding the expectations. It is really critical to map out, set the table, understand what the institution's going to, what's our structure, what are some of the basic terms that the university is going to hold on tight, and why. How does the inventor fit into the equation? Inventors fit into the equation. How does the patent process bolt onto this equation? Can we just rely on your patent counsel to do all of our patent work? Will they advise the company, right? So some of this feeds into the license negotiation, and you really need to set the table so that you're not then trying to correct at the 11th hour when everybody's excited to sign a deal. The only thing I would add is some of the lessons that we've learned in these negotiations. Don't negotiate by email, please. We don't understand each other's position when we do that. We can change a percentage here and there, but why? Just explain it. We might accept the explanation. We might not, and we might have an explanation as to why we won't. So a lot of the licensing process, from our perspective, get in a room. Commit to reaching a set of terms before you leave the room, in person. More effective from our perspective. Don't just sign a deal and walk away. Understand what you licensed. Understand your rights. Understand what the IP covers. And I should probably stop there, and I can add to it, but that might be a good segue.
I love everything you just said. Man, I love it. We're humans from Earth. Meet people and talk.
Yep.
And explain to them why you have a position on something. Don't just throw an email out there, and don't just put in a comment on Word. Yeah, totally agree.
That was just a feast of incredible advice from incredibly skilled negotiators and licensing professionals, which underscores why my role in licensing negotiations is almost always on behalf of the company, because university people usually have that very well in hand. Sometimes I'll get a question about specific terms or how something might work legally, or when it's nuts and bolt stuff at the patent office, but I'm much more typically representing the company in these circumstances, and so that's what I'll talk about now. You can certainly hire an attorney to negotiate the whole license with you and be in the room. Many business people are comfortable doing much of it on their own, but I would urge anyone in that position in the strongest possible terms to check in with your patent attorney and your corporate attorney early in the process. As Steve says, to know what you're trying to license and to get the big picture outline of that deal. One of the things I see it can be a problem for many companies, is that they license too much IP. They'll license IP they don't need from the university. Get with your patent attorney early. Understand what the IP that's relevant to the project is, understand what you're going to do with it, and whether or not you need it. And explain your position to the universities, see if they agree, and reach agreement on that big picture stuff before you start figuring out the nuts and bolts of who's going to do the prosecution and the very important but more involved, lower on the list terms.
I have a piece of advice on counsel. If you're going to be negotiating with an academic center, it's strongly advised to use counsel that's done deals with academic centers. There are certain things about licenses with academic centers that are very particular about their risk tolerance and their by-dole compliance, and you can blow through a lot of money with an experienced counsel. And it's not worth it because they're not going to change their position. Do you want to comment on that?
That's a fantastic comment. We agree.
We agree. There are just certain things that universities cannot agree to, no matter what you say, because it's the nature of the business and it's the nature of their role in society. And if you're working with counsel that doesn't like that and doesn't get why that's the case, you can blow through a lot of fees trying to get them to accept something that they just can't.
Yeah, I remember one counsel, he was young, and I won't name the firm to protect him. I mean, he got more upset at me than somebody I know personally. Like, I mean, he was so upset, and I mean, it was not personal. I mean, I was just like, we cannot flex here. We are an academic, nonprofit research institution that is accepting your tax dollars to do this work, and this is not flexible. You can get as upset as you want, and you can go home upset, and you cannot sleep tonight, and you can come back tomorrow, and our position is not going to change. And I'm going to be in the exact same state of mind I am in, so get counsel that's not going to waste your money. My advice is
The only thing I would just add to that is some of those core terms in the nature of how the university operates and those federal obligations that are wrapped around us. Technology transfer is not actually selling, acquiring, or transferring the ownership of the asset, right? What we're doing is giving a right to commercialize the asset. In terms of by-dole, some of what you'll see sometimes focus in on in terms of terms is expectations regarding development. Well, under our federal regulations, we can't have intellectual property sitting on the shelf for whatever reason. For defensive purposes, commercial defensive, there may be a commercial purpose in letting it sit on the shelf, but that's not going to work for us. We have a requirement to ensure the intellectual property that we're licensing gets out to the benefit of society, public, to the taxpayer that funded it. That's the deal. If we want to own it, we want to license it, we have to make sure it gets out there.
Can I just comment, just one quick comment? Having just gone through this whole licensing from a university, it really is very important to, and it looks like I'm seeing a lot of heads nod here, but it's important to talk face to face. I know, at least I'll speak for myself, during the COVID times, I was perfectly comfortable sitting and looking at folks across the, on the screen, but when you can, it's so important to do everything in person if you can.
Yeah.
So we talked about how important it is for the science to be sound, for that license to be, or I hope we did, but I want to be clear. I mean, you need sound science for that license to be able to walk through this de-risking and reach these value inflection points, and you need sound intellectual property for that to walk through this de-risking. Is there anything else that you guys would plug into this equation that you think is essential? I mean, you've got to have your scientists queued up, and you've got to have your expectations aligned. What about a great team? What about bringing a great team together?
Sure, yeah, that's one of the ways that 360 Pharma Solutions helps companies, is to bring those key folks to the table.
And when do you do that?
And when do we do that? Well, this is not just a business person, Delphine, speaking. This is, this is from a point of view of just good, sound business practices. I think you bring the team in as early as possible. So you'll want to, for instance,
You said as late as possible.
as early as possible. Did I say?
I couldn't hear you. No, I couldn't hear you. I couldn't hear you.
Early as possible. And just a quick vignette here. One of our clients actually brought us in to help his team put together an IND enabling study plan. In that situation, the first thing we do is a gap analysis. We look at all the data that have been generated until then, and then what is outstanding, what data would be required in order to get to that IND stage. And at the very beginning, the client said, well, I said during conversation, client says that, oh, the next study is going to be a study about X. And I said, well, where is that on the IND enabling study plan? And he said, well, in other words, some teams don't necessarily stick to the plan, and the crux of the story is that they wasted a lot of money because they didn't stick to the IND enabling study plan. So that's
comment if
yeah, absolutely.
And Heather, I think you said the IP, the license, the team, right? I think on the team where there are opportunities to avoid issues that we've seen. Number one, sometimes we'll see an over-teaming approach where, Aunt Jane, Uncle Joe, everybody's joining the party, right? Now you've got more people around the table than you need. It's then hard to reach decisions. In fact, we've actually had issues where it looked like a great team, but it looked like a company that maybe was in its Series A or beyond. And now you had people fighting for positions within the company, and we've actually had the situation where we had to walk away because they couldn't actually agree to who would be CEO, right? So who do you need? Who's going to run the company? We always want counsel at the table with the company. So from our perspective, we really don't even want to negotiate unless the company does have proper counsel at the table. But in terms of team, don't forget about the inventor. You have to, at that stage of team building, work the inventor into the strategy. Could we license it off directly to the company and have no engagement with the inventor? Sure. The university owns the rights to the intellectual property. They are key, however. I've never seen it work yet. They are key in technology transfer. You have to find a way to properly engage the inventor. They, at least at Temple, they can be equity holders. You don't have cash yet in the company. But be clear in terms of what their expectations are. They're not open access R&D arm. They're not an employee of yours. They're not on call for every little question that you have. So it is important to establish if they're getting compensated through equity, what is that for? So again, in the team development, there's the company team, but the team also needs to extend to how you're actually engaging the inventor in this process, because they're the key technology translator.
Can I just say, to add to that, I got off on IND enabling studies in my last response, but it's important to ensure that the team understands each person's role.
Yes.
It's very important, especially around the inventor, because it can go either way. In other words, the inventor can be very, very engaged and sometimes forceful, or they can be standoffish. But that optimizing the roles of each
you
individual.
need a team that adds credibility and value.
Yeah.
Your team needs to bring something to the table.
Exactly.
They need to have investors that pick up the phone. They need to help you de-risk the technology and help you with strategy. It can't be Aunt so-and-so unless Aunt so-and-so is running a major pharmaceutical company or has run a major pharmaceutical company, in which case Aunt so-and-so is perfect. Right?
Yep.
Yeah, they have to be strategically aligned with your de-risking, and they need to be plugged in with a very specific metric that you need to reach. Yeah. And you need to know what your metrics are. Yes, and you have to follow them.
I was
Yes,
going
and
to
you have
say
to pay
no,
attention to them.
Yeah.
Right?
And follow them. That's
Yes,
right.
exactly. You need to pay attention to them and watch and make sure that you're achieving them, because yes, if you can't monitor it, you can't measure it, as I say. And if you don't monitor it, then you're not paying any attention to it, and you're not achieving your goals, or you don't even know. So why don't we talk about term sheets, options, and licenses? Because I think those are really important, and that people understand how they're different. Because we were talking about deals and conceptualizing deals. Yeah.
So, actually, large company or startup company, we do use option agreements really as a starter agreement to really test out the relationship. The companies are also interested in evaluating the intellectual property internally, testing whether or not they could successfully commercializing it before committing under a license agreement. So we use option agreements frequently and almost exclusively for startup companies. Well, startup companies are a corporate filing with a name at that moment, right? We also want to understand that management is starting to be solidified in place. We want to understand what their plan is for the development and commercialization of that technology. We may put in actual milestones, like if we're going to work together to put an SBIR, STTR, or non-dilutive funding application together, well, let's agree that that's something we're going to achieve together under an option agreement, so that we know that we can work together and actually achieve value together. So an option agreement, though, what it doesn't do is give you the right to develop and commercialize the intellectual property. So it is restricted in terms of what it's granting you, but what it does grant you is, as long as you've met the requirements of the option, you then get the first and exclusive right to negotiate a license in that case. Now, what that, just to round it out, always raises is, well, what are the terms? If I assign the option, are you just going to blow me away at the end of that period with unreasonable terms? So often what we will do is build in a term sheet that includes range or some expectations in terms of the terms should the option get converted into a license, so that they can start fundraising efforts. You can start to plan from a corporate perspective without the unknown of what those licensing terms would be when you convert the option.
Just to make sure we're not, yeah, the term sheet's so essential, just to make sure we're not all wasting our time, right? And sometimes we'll put parameters on it, like, should this or that bear out, then, this will be triggered, so.
One thing I wanted to add on to this, to what Steve said, is sort of another layer of whether you really need the classic university exclusive license to the technology, or whether you should consider a non-exclusive. And it's a sort of a let the technology fit the deal situation. If the patent that's really going to cover the product is still a few years down the line and may or may not be owned by the university at that point, a non-exclusive license may make more sense to allow you to develop on your own and get to that point.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, Alexei?
So a couple of questions about options.
Do you want a microphone?
Am I loud enough?
This is going to be saved online, so it might be good to just take the microphone. And at what time, are we into the question portion yet? 1 minute. Okay. Well, how about this? How about we moved into the question portion, or question and comment portion? And this is Alexei Melishuk. He's our director of licensing at Jefferson with me, and we've worked together for over a decade as well.
Thanks. So several questions that bundle kind of. What's your typical option term? Option fee and deliverables. Like, what do you expect the company to give you, especially if they say, oh, give us a free option or a longer term option? Like, what do you want in exchange?
Yeah. Oh, actually, before we move into Alexei's response, I want everybody to know that BioStrategy Partners is proudly being nominated for being the connector of the year by BioBuzz, and actually BioBuzz is here, and we're going to put up a QR code, and you are going to vote for us. You are going to vote for us. So you're going to get out your phone, and you're gonna vote for us, and then we're going to respond about options and terms. So you are not leaving this room, and so everybody, if I don't see you, at least pretend to vote for us. You can also vote for MVAX in that same voting for Company of the Year. All right,
So again, each uniquely delivered to the situation, so this isn't used against me over and over again, but typically what we will see about 6 to 12 months in terms of option period. That has to be justified. What are you going to do for 6 to 12 months, right? So the time will vary. Sometimes we'll build in, for fundraising purposes, extension options for that, right? We don't want to leave investors at the table if that happens to match up with the actual conversion of the option to the license agreement. That's the timing question. Fees, negotiable. Some of that, but when it's not killer. Right? These companies are just starting out of the university. They don't have funding at the moment, or they're raising funding potentially under the option. So we're trying to be reasonable as possible in terms of fees. I don't know that I can give out a specific number in that case. Deliverables under the option, consistently what we're asking for, we need to, and this actually feeds into the license process anyway, we need a development plan, a commercialization plan for our technology. So we would require that anyway for our license agreement. So during this period, let's start to build that and understand that and gain agreement on that. We do, if there are results, data, or anything that may have been generated under the option agreement, we also want that as a report back to us under the agreement. So, and I think the third, we used to give the company time to get qualified management in place, but due to the issue that I mentioned before, that is now required before you sign the option with the university. And I think that, and we may, again, case by case, and this then connects to the fee, right? If there's a significant value that we can achieve together, like getting an SBIR, STTR application out of the door together as a milestone, and that may connect to what fee you're paying in terms of the option, that we would put that in as a deliverable because that would be important for us.
Yeah, Rebecca. Yeah, Rebecca Grant. And I'll take her microphone. Oh, yeah, no worries. Yeah, I share the booming voice with a lot of the crowd, but this is going to be online, so we should make sure that they can hear the questions as well.
I'm just curious about the inventor, because some inventors, it's like there was just really something altruistic and maybe they don't want to be involved. Do you have scenarios where they're just completely just don't?
May I?
Yeah.
May I? Well, I'm gonna jump in, and Steve, I think he'll also probably answer. So I think what you're asking is, what if people don't want to work with us? And one of the things I'll start off with is a reminder about BIDOL, which is a federal requirement that we try to advance our technologies to the public. And that does include a requirement around patenting if it was federally funded. So we do have a little bit of teeth, if you will, there. Now, we can still have people who are resistant to working with us, and obviously, patentability can go out the window with I don't know if it's obvious. Patentability can be difficult in light of publications, but it does help to just say, look, like if it's federally funded, you are required to do this because then it can compromise future funding for them, and that is, they live what they live on. The other thing is we do so much support for our PIs that is so critical. Like I said, we try to leave them in a better place than we found them. Somebody approaches us and it's not patent time yet, we're going to connect them with people who can help them reduce to practice. We're going to, one of the things that didn't get said expressly is there's this whole time period where it may not be patent time yet, but it's still value inflection time, but it's like kind of micro value inflection time where like I'm gonna, maybe go talk to Takeda or something and say, like, when would you maybe be interested in something in this mechanism pathway or whatever? Because nobody cares if Heather's interested, but somebody, a grantor or a grantee or a funder might be interested if, like, oh, well, Takeda just wants to see the PK or the off-target tox, right? So then I might be able to get them a great letter of support for a grant. And then they do need IP, right? Like Takeda is certainly not going to want something dedicated to the public, right? So those people can sometimes be brought through that kind of, I think just kind of, they do need that funding. They do need those partnerships. And Steve, do you have any thoughts on that as well?
Rebecca, I was rifling through all of our scenarios and agreed. Where we need to, we can. But I can't think of a situation where we have. Is this on? I don't think so. So I think you heard me, but again, agreed, we can if we need to, but I can't think of a situation where we have. In fact, what I see more is the immediate recognition by the company that they need the inventor's advice. So if we start dumping a lot of data related to the intellectual property, here, go read a patent, it just sprouts endless questions. That they're going to need guidance on from the inventor. And I'm not sitting there trying to interpret it either in the office. You really need the expert that developed the invention to be able to be responding to interpretation of the data, how the experiments were performed in matters like that. Where it gets sticky though is again, the university and the inventor aren't just simply on call. Right? They're writing grants. They're teaching the next generation researchers and students. So you need to be formalized in how you're actually going to get that type of advice as a company.
Can I comment one quick comment? So my startup company actually lived this scenario just a little while ago where we came upon this technology when I was mentoring a scientist at a university. And at the end of that mentoring relationship, the scientist said basically that they would like to commercialize the asset. And I said, that's fantastic. Here's how you do it. All the steps. After a month or so of that, they decided they were going back to the bench. And so I spun out the technology, but we keep in close contact with the inventors. They are at our scientific advisory boards to talk about the scientific part of it, not through the entire advisory board because they're not part of the company, but we stay in very close touch. So I do think it's important.
One more additional comment is really what we see is the companies trying to figure out how to increase engagement with the inventor in the lab. So in reality, what we like to see and what we do see is that startup company raises some money, then turns right back around and funds the researcher's lab to do further work, right? So what we're seeing normally is a deepening of the engagement between our startup company, the university, and the inventor. From a strategic and a competitive standpoint, very smart, because what you're actually doing is creating a bed of new R&D that can lead to new innovation. Under typical sponsored research terms, you would have an option to license that into the company. So now from an investment raising, fundraising, but also in terms of building your portfolio, now you do have an active pipeline into new potential innovation when you're deepening your engagement with the university and the inventor's lab.
So can I ask a question?
Yes.
Oh, interesting. Oh, are you going to ask the audience or us? Oh, him. Okay.
So it seems really idyllic, but are there conflicts of interest considerations? Maybe you could speak a little bit about those.
So we did develop what I think is not me, because again, this is an independent arm of the university by design. We have a conflict of interest process and team that is used to seeing startups move out of the institution. So it is actually a well-oiled, formatted, but it's thought through. It's managed very tightly because we talked about the integrity of the process, the technology, and the research. Well, you want to give that confidence that we are managing the integrity of that whole process, while the university may be conflicted and while the inventor may be conflicted in that process as well. So in terms of answering your question, the research coming back into the institution does present a transaction with the institution that then does create a conflict of interest. We have an entire team that will assess whether that is manageable. So we may not always go through with a further transaction if it becomes an unmanageable conflict. But where it is determined that it's manageable, they will use what is a management plan where everybody is on the same page in terms of what the rules of the game are, what dividers are up. In some cases, we have independent monitors that are overseeing the research to make sure that experimental design and data is reviewed. So for the most part, in a typical startup company, where there's conflicts that present, we can manage them, and there is a committee and process to do that.
Are we at time? 3 minutes, okay.
So Daphne, you mentioned to engage you guys as early as possible, but for like early startups, they don't have a lot of money to engage with you guys. Like, how does that work? Do you guys have terms with that, or just explain a little bit?
Thank you for the question, Brian. We are startup friendly. We understand the startup space. In fact, we live, some of us live the startup space with my other company, the startup company. But 360 Pharma Solutions has two startup friendly profiles or payment structures, fee structures. One is the straight fee for service, which we understand there's not a lot of room for movement in with regard to fees in startup companies. And there's the other part of that fee schedule could be equity. Sometimes we do take equity in lieu of payment or in addition to. I'll give you an example. One of our startup clients, a longtime startup client, we helped them prepare an SBIR grant. This was 3 years, I guess it was a year and a half ago. They just got funded. And so then we got, thank you. And so we got paid. We took a small fee up front and then had, a percentage of the grant when it was won. So yes.
Justin, do you want to comment on how you can also help defer costs too? Because we brought that up in the panel, and panel pre-discussion, we didn't actually, I don't think we really hit that on the head.
Yeah, I'm delighted to. So similar to what Delphani said, all kinds of alternative fee arrangements to defer costs are possible. But one point I wanted to make about the services of counsel early in the process is that it can really mean a lot to retain someone, even if they don't start the lion's share of the work and therefore accrue the lion's share of the fees until much, much later. An hour or two conversation with a patent attorney or a corporate attorney early on in the process can provide a wealth of good advice and action items that startup founders can then act on for the next months or even years on their own, maybe just with a quick check-in with counsel occasionally. And then when the money is available and the work really has to be done, that can be started. The other part is purely IP-centric, and I wanted to comment that most people who aren't very, very experienced with IP don't appreciate how much flexibility there is at the patent office in terms of delaying examination and really kind of deferring the big hard fights with the examiner until you really have to have them. Most companies I've worked with are a little too eager to charge in. And it's not difficult to understand why. They filed their application, they're very proud of their invention, they want the examiner to understand, and they really would like to get their patent. But IP being a necessary but generally never a sufficient condition to get yourself funded, having the application filed and a good strategy for how you're going to get the patent issued that an investor can believe in really is almost as good as actually having the patent and doesn't require 5 office actions and 3 RCEs with associated costs.
That said, don't cheap out on your IP strategy.
Yeah, spend the money you have to spend when you have to spend it. But you don't need to accelerate it, but you also don't want to nickel and dime it when it's really time to build that value.
Right, yeah. Okay, awesome. Thank you guys all so much for joining us today. I hope that you found this informative. I'm so incredibly thankful to BioLabs for giving us the space and the food and all of our sponsors today. Please stay and mingle a bit and enjoy a soda and something to nibble and vote for us. Vote for us. Vote for us. Thank you. Oh, and to our AV team as well, who also donated their time. Yeah.